No, 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 no.
Psych! That's the wrong number!
Oh, how the turntables, my man. There's been a turnaround. Suddenly now Affliction is super popular. What's going on? Affliction Warlock. So, Affliction started out as a pretty popular spec in Uldir. Not because it was very strong compared to other specs, but because in comparison Destruction and Demonology were really poor. We entered into BOD, where Affliction was still amongst the least played DPS specs. For ranged, it was beating Fire and Arcane, but just because Frost was super popular, and then there was Affliction in terms of play rates. Demonology was still the most played, and that still, Warlocks were not very strong. Then we entered Tunnel Palace. That's when Destruction started rising up the ranks, and started matching Affliction in play rates. The use of Havoc was very strong. In the Tunnel Palace, they started getting their Azerite traits that were much more powerful, like Flashpoint and Rolling Havoc, as well as the Essences. And then finally we went into Nyalota, and it's time for Destruction to roll into max gear, while Demonology drops in play rates massively. And Affliction remains still with a pretty low play rate. Still more played than Demonology and more played than Arcane. As you know, Fire Mage was completely going off, and more played than Marksmanship because Beast Mastery was also going off in mega scaling. But throughout the expansion, Affliction has been pretty lowly played when it comes to raids, but more importantly, Mythic Plus, it was unusable. In Mythic Plus there has been this anathema cast upon Affliction, which is the fact that they take too much time to build up their DOTs, and they don't even have a burst to utilize them after they have built them up. They're just supposed to let them stay on the target for multiple periods of time to actually get something out of their damage, which is not really feasible in Mythic Plus. All of this changed overnight because Affliction Warlock has been redesigned in a very, very small manner, in a very, very simple manner that has made it much more powerful. Going over the redesign, the only real thing that we have to point out is that Unstable Affliction is no longer your Soul Shard spender. It's going to go back to its pre-Legion days of being just a DOT that you just have to keep up on your focus target, your single primary target at all times. And now there is going to be a new spender, Malefic Rapture. Malefic Rapture is possibly the strongest shard spender ever in the history of Warlock. Maybe it can tie up with Chaos Bolt of Destruction, but overall it is an incredibly powerful spender. This spender allowing you to make use of your DOTs from any target, from basically any range within 100 yards. Currently it's working in terms of range. It is just super powerful. It works with all of your DOTs that you have. It will work, since you don't have them yet, it will work with your Covenant DOTs as well. And that's it. Such a simple change for the spec, because everything else is the same. You want to keep your Corruption on the target, Agony, if you talent into it, you want your Life on Life and your Unstable Affliction, but now the only main difference is this Malefic Rapture, which is going to drastically empower Warlock, and we're going to see how. You're already seeing, partially, in the pre-patch, how much stronger Affliction has gotten with just this minor change, so let's go a little bit more in depth in what happened to the way Affliction plays. Talking about a makeshift rotation for you, for Affliction. When it comes to single target, you start with Haunt on the target. Haunt is going to give you 10% more damage on the target and apply 1 stack of Shadow Embrace, so 3% more damage on the target as well. You then go for Unstable Affliction, into Agony, into Siphon Life, into Corruption. You then place your Phantom Singularity down, or your Vile Taint. You can then go for your trinkets and big cooldowns, your Racial, your Trinket, your Dark Soul Misery, and your Darkler. Darkler extending all the DOTs by 8 seconds. You have everything set up now to spam Malefic Rapture, even 7 times in a row, if you're lucky with your Soul Shard generation. Once you have done with that, it's about to go back in maintenance mode. You reapply Drain Soul, you reapply Haunt, you reapply your DOTs. The entire rotation of Affliction is going to be about when do I have as many DOTs out as possible. That's the time I want to get to 5 Soul Shards and then dump them all in Malefic Rapture. The question when can be answered by the Covenant and talents you have chosen. If you've chosen Vile Taint has a 20-second cooldown, so just about every time you can start pulling your Soul Shards to place down Vile Taint as an extra DOT for your Malefic Rapture. If you're playing with Phantom Singularity, it's going to be a 45-second cooldown whenever you want to pull your Soul Shards to have an extra DOT in Phantom Singularity on the target. When you're playing with Covenant like Impending Catastrophe, is going to be a 1 minute cooldown for your DOT to be active on the target. Soul Rot is going to be also another 1 minute cooldown for a DOT to be active on the target, and if you're playing with Scurving Tide, you add just an extra DOT single target always active for you. That's going to be the most important thing you have to play around with the new Warlock and the new Malefic Rapture, the amount of DOTs you can have on the target. Now, if you want some extra min-maxing, if you want some extra things to take care of when you're thinking about doing damages, number one, try to put the DOTs on your target based on their duration. This is something you don't have yet in the pre-patch, but Unstable Affliction in Shadowlands is going to get an extra 5-second duration. Right now, you will see that your Unstable Affliction lasts 16 seconds. In Shadowlands, is going to last 21. So the order, purely by duration, is going to be Unstable Affliction, 21 seconds, Agony, 18 seconds, Siphon Life, 15 seconds, and Corruption, 14 seconds. Followed by Vile Taint for 10 seconds, or Phantom Singularity as well for 15 seconds. Generally speaking, though, you always want to try to put Agony as quickly as possible on the target, since Agony is the DOT that can give you Soul Shards when it ticks. And remember, you will be entering each combat with just 3 Soul Shards on pull, and you always want to have 5 before you start your Malefic Rapture burst. So you need to make sure that your Agony is on the target, ticking and giving you back Soul Shards. Another good thing to take into account is remember your Shadow Embrace. Your Shadow Embrace is the debuff applied by Shadow Bolt, which is now going to be applied by Drain Soul most of the time, since Drain Soul will be the talent you will be using most of the time in the first row, and that is 9% more damage, which is very relevant. It is also going to be applied by Haunt when you play it. One of the things you can do, and you will do most likely in the rotation in Shadowlands, is not only everything I just mentioned in your rotation, starting with Haunt, applying all your DOTs, then using all your cooldowns before starting to burst Malefic Rapture. You want to use Drain Soul for 2 ticks to apply 2 extra stacks of Shadow Embrace. 1 stack of Shadow Embrace was applied on pull by Haunt, but then you're missing 2 stacks. So before you start your burst with Malefic Rapture, you can just channel Drain Soul for about 1.5 seconds to get 2 stacks of Shadow Embrace. That's about all of the min-maxing you can do on a single target. When it comes to AoE, the priority has shifted from wanting to stack as many DOTs on one target to try to get as many DOTs on multiple targets. Obviously, Phantom Singularity and Vile Taint can quickly, instantly get your DOTs on as many as 20 targets. That is the soft cap. You can use Seed of Corruption to also spread corruption to 20 targets very quickly. If you're playing with Impending Catastrophe Covenant, the Ventier, you can also get another DOT on 20 targets very quickly. This is already going to give you 3 DOTs on 20 targets in just 3 seconds. Very, very powerful for burst. The general idea, when you will be in a mid plus and you see your tank starting to, group 2 packs together, you can just tab target Agony on 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. As they are nicely and tightly grouped, you can use Seed of Corruption, you can use Vile Taint, you can use your Impending Catastrophe Covenant, and then you go to town with your Malefic Rapture. If it's a big pool with a big enemy, you can pull down your Trinket, you can pull down your Dark Soul Misery, your Dark Lair, 1 Unstable Affliction, on a primary big fat target, and then you go down to town with your AoE. That's going to be the main divide between single target and AoE. But as you notice, I already mentioned a few times your Covenants, and this is where Affliction is going to shine compared to its other 2 specs. So let's go over the Covenants. Affliction is one of the best specs, to my knowledge, from all the specs I've tried and seen, the best spec in the game when it comes to options in the Covenants. This is also at the same time bad, because you can only choose 1 Covenant at a time, which means you are most likely to be missing and wishing you had them all available, as opposed to other specs, Sometimes it's easier to have 3 shitty Covenants and a very strong one, because you will just be playing the strong one and not miss the other 3. But when it comes to Affliction, you will actually be missing all the other ones when you're not playing them. Let's go over them. Scurving Tide is extremely powerful in single target. Scurving Tide counts as a DOT, meaning your Malefic Rapture will always do increased damage on a primary target because you have Scurving Tide. Scurving Tide cooldown is also reset when the target doesn't die, which means basically 100% uptime, 98% uptime and 2% time of recasting it on a primary target. It's your dream in raids. You have a boss, Scurving Tide is always going to be on that boss, and you will always be doing increased single target priority damage on that target because of Scurving Tide. Very powerful. The generation of Soul Shards, 5 Soul Shards if you play it on a dying target, is okay, but not very powerful. Soul Shard generation is the least of the problems for Affliction when it comes to Warlock specs. Unstable Affliction is going to guarantee 1 Soul Shards if it's on a target that's dying, and you can also snipe dying targets with Drain Soul for another Soul Shard. you are by far the easiest of the Warlock specs to generate soul shards. So this part of Scoring Tide is not very powerful. It's the DOT that works with Malefic Rapture and that can be active at all times on a single target. That is very powerful. I need to breathe. The other good Covenant, this is for a completely opposite damage profile. This is where you're going to be starting to miss the Covenants, because Impending Catastrophe is an amazing Covenant for Affliction Warlock. It has been giga nerfed in damage, and you don't care. You know, the initial explosion was like 100%. It's been nerfed to 20 and 105. It doesn't matter, because the powerful thing of Impending Catastrophe is that it leaves behind a DOT for 12 seconds. Soft capped, meaning it can hit 20 targets. That's extremely powerful in Mythic Plus. You know, as I mentioned, the tank is pulling 2 packs or 3 packs, boom, you Impending Catastrophe and you get them all dotted immediately. There is also the minor, but is also a very positive effect in Mythic Plus, that it's also going to cast Debilitating Curses on all targets hit. Weakness for less auto attack damage, or tongues for less spell damage by reducing their cast time. That's very powerful in AoE. It's likely not going to be very used if you're planning on being a Mythic Raider. You will definitely go for more single target oriented Covenant, but if you're thinking about Mythic Plus, then this is definitely the choice for your increased AoE damage. The other two choices give you even more specialization. After the single target of Scoring Tide and the AoE of Impending Catastrophe, you have the burst of Soul Rot. Soul Rot is going to tag up to 4 enemies with a DOT. So again, working with Malefic Rapture, but on top of giving you an extra DOT on 4 targets, it's also going to debuff them and make your Drain Life hit all targets hit by this DOT. This is shit in and of itself, because Drain Life does mediocre damage. It does literally half the damage of Drain Soul. The real powerful part is the fact that you can hit 4 of them at the same time, and you can talent into Inevitable Demise. This is why it's so much better for Affliction. The other 2 specs don't have access to Inevitable Demise. You can empower your Drain Life by 750% more damage. So on fight with multiple targets, where every minute, which is the cooldown of Soul Rot, you can guarantee 3 to 4 different targets being constantly on Agony. This is going to stack your Inevitable Demise to 50, and every time Soul Rot is up, you can Soul Rot and mega damage with your Drain Life. Again, very, very powerful. Unfortunately, it is very niche and very specialized on certain encounters, so it's going to be more difficult to play properly, and when you have to choose your Covenant to use for all content, because you have to stick with it, at least for a full week, this is going to be unlikely the one you choose most of the time, but it's a very powerful option. There is going to be a case, I guarantee you, where you are progressing on a boss in Mythic raiding. This boss is going to have 3 to 4 targets spawning at the same time, and it's going to be very powerful for you to stack up your Inevitable Demise buff, wait for those to spawn, be a Night Fae Warlock that can have Soul Rot and dump the Soul Rot on the targets who spawn to immediately burst them down with Drain Life. I can already imagine a fight like Inerva, which is entirely single target, except the only phase when you open the container of concentrated anima that spawns 3 to 4 mobs. This is going to be a perfect fight for this Covenant, for example. And then you have the last Covenant, which is even more specialization, because this Covenant is going to be about execute damage. Your Decimating Bolt for Maldraxxus. Necroload Covenant is going to empower your next 3 Drain Souls to be doing 100% more damage. The reason why this is so powerful is because it's 100% more damage. Your Drain Soul also does 100% more damage on enemies below 20% HP, and you can even go for the legendary Malefic Wrath, which makes your Malefic Rapture increase the damage of your Drain Soul by up to 75% for 8 seconds. Not just once, 8 seconds. This means, quite simply, that you can Malefic Rapture twice, use Decimating Bolt to get the buff, Malefic Rapture the 3rd time to refresh the 8-second buff, and then go 3 back-to-back-to-back Drain Souls, doing 275% more damage. 100 by Drain Soul because it's execute phase, 100 because of Decimating Bolt, and 75% because of Malefic Wrath. Extremely powerful. Lots of choice in your Covenants. As I mentioned, lots of sorrow and sadness, because when you choose one, it means you don't have the other 3. You know, it's a rich people problem, really, having so many good Covenants. Not many specs can have that luxury. Talking about luxuries and choice, we have to go to the Legendaries now. Legendaries do also give you quite a few options. We have just mentioned Malefic Wrath, which is going to be for your execute Drain Soul synergy. Whenever you play Malefic Wrath, you almost always want to pair it up with the Necrolord Covenant, because it's just so powerful. Perpetual Agony of the Ajakir, it's also going to give you the choice to play for this in more multi-target fights and Mythic Plus, where you can at least guarantee your Agony to be constantly on at least 3 targets. Sacrolash is mostly for padding, really. 15% more damage on Corruption, as well as a 50% movement speed slow is going to be pretty good for control. in Mythic Plus and control in big enemy numbers encounters, but most of the time it's not that powerful. The real additions are going to be Wrath of Consumption and Wilfred's Sigil. Wilfred's Sigil, one of the few specs that have a neutral multi-spec legendary that's very powerful. Wilfred's Sigil of Superior Summon is going to reduce the Dark Lair by 2 seconds per soul shard spent. This is very powerful because you already have a talent that can lower your Dark Lair from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, and then you can even use this one. And you even have a Soulbind for this, which we will go over later. Your Dark Lair can be lowered by a lot, even down to 60 to 80 second cooldown. You know, very good. And lastly, Wrath of Consumption. This is again for AoE, multi-target, multi-enemies fights where you can also guarantee them dying pretty quickly. Wrath of Consumption is going to make your Agony or Corruption on targets that die buff you with 5% more DOT damage for 20 seconds, stacking up to 25%. So, very good. In raid fights with a lot of fodder that keeps spawning, you just dot them, they die, and you keep this buff up, and of course very good in Mythic Plus. You go on one pack, you keep the 25% up, and then you go into the next pack, and you have 20 seconds worth of this buff. As this buff is expiring or close to expiring, more targets are going to be dying, so this buff is going to stay up. Very good for AoE. So you have your priority single target damage being empowered by the Wilfred's Sigil. You have your spread out AoE with Sacral Lash and Wrath of Consumption being there. You have your Perpetual Agony, which works in both single target, cleave, and AoE situations. And then you have your Malefic Rat for execute phase. Again, lots of choice, lots of options, very high value, most of them. There really isn't anything to complain too much about Affliction, really, when we are going over the spec. Even your mastery is very good. Your damage increase from your mastery is essentially all your damage. From Malefic Rapture, which is your spender, to all of your builders and your dots. Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, Vile Taint, Phantom Singularity, Unstable Affliction, all that is counted in your mastery. It's basically nearly 80% of your total damage. Remember what I said about figuring out how strong your mastery is and how strong your mastery scales. Just look at how much damage is going to impact. This mastery is going to count all of your damage except your summon pet damage, except your drain soul damage, and you know, potions and trinket damage and whatnot. That totals out to a little bit over 80% of total damage. That is massive scaling mastery. You know, even in your talent choices, as I mentioned, you have plenty of options. You can use Siphon Life in fights where you have a single target. When you start having more targets, it's going to become a little bit harder to keep Siphon Life up, because just reapplying all your 4 DOTs is going to be 3 GCDs and a hard casting of Unstable Affliction. It's quite a bit of time. Siphon Life only lasts 15 seconds. If you have to keep it up on 3 different targets, it becomes a lot of wasted time. It becomes more valuable to simply go for Ride in Agony to increase the overall damage of Agony, or simply to use Unstable Corruption to give you more freedom of GCDs in not having to constantly reapply Corruption. The first row, as I already mentioned, you can go for Inevitable Demise for the burst, or for Drain Soul for the everyday use. The level 35 row, Sow the Seeds is pretty bad, but Phantom Singularity and Vile Taint give you some pretty nice options. More sustained AoE damage or more burst damage, either one. The level 45 row has a dead spot, I guess. We could criticize this. Grimoire of Sacrifice is not really used. It has lost a lot of value over time. The damage it doesn't synergize with anything. Having extra shadow damage randomly, it doesn't scale with your mastery, it doesn't scale with your DOTs, it doesn't scale with anything, so it's not very powerful. But Haunt and Dark Caller give you some pretty nice options. The consistent single target extra damage from Haunt, or the everyday use Dark Caller for stronger cooldown in all situations, is just nice options. And the last row is currently being cannibalized by Dark Soul Misery a little bit too much because of how powerful the cooldown is. 30% for 20 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown is pretty solid, but the other two choices are not that bad. When you consider that Soul Conduit is going to essentially allow you to Malefic Rapture more times and reduce the cooldown even further of your Dark Caller. If you're using the Wilfred Legendary, this is going to be a very nice talent. As well as Creeping Death, it is mostly for padding, to be fair. It is mostly for the few fights where you really want to have 2 to 3 targets constantly dotted. So this talent is going to get massive value from it. But even with some of the weaker talents, the amount of options you have are just still massive. When you add to this the Covenant choice and then the Legendary choice, your damage profile is just so nice for all purposes because of Malefic Rapture, weaving so well in your rotation. Touching on their Soulbind and their Conduit to finish this. Their choices are very, very good because they have 2 primary conduits you want to go for that are very, very nice. Focused Malignancy and Corrupting Leer. Corrupting Leer is the conduit that gives your Agony and Unstable Affliction a 3% chance to reduce the cooldown of Summon Dark Lair by 5 seconds. Now this, on a single target, is already nearly a 30-second cooldown reduction. I tried this And on 3 targets with just Agony on 3 targets and Unstable Affliction on 1 target, it's enough to reduce the cooldown of Darkglare by 1 minute. Meaning it goes from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, lining up with Misery without the need of the talent, without the need of Dark Color talent. And this is just from 1 Conduit at rank 1, because it starts at 3% right now, and it's gonna scale all the way up to 5.8% chance. So it's just gonna get better and better. The other one that is pretty good is Flux Malignancy. Again, it's just so nice in the way it works. Malefic Rapture dealing 15% increased damage to the target suffering from Unstable Affliction, scaling all the way up to 36%. This is just extra priority damage. Now your Malefic Rapture is going to do more damage to the target you're actually trying to damage more. The target you are trying to damage more is signified by the fact that the DOT you can only use on 1 target is on that target. Quite obviously, when you put Unstable Affliction on a target, that's the target you want to focus, and this Conduit is going to increase the damage you do on it. Very, very nice. The other 2 of your Conduits can have some more use, particularly Cold Embrace when it comes to scaling. Cold Embrace is going to increase the effectiveness of Shadow Embrace, starting at 33%, meaning you will be doing not 3, 6 and 9% more damage, but you will be doing 4, 8 and 12% more damage. This effectively means you're doing 3% more damage on single target, and when you scale this all the way up to max rank, it's effectively going to increase your single target damage by 6% compared to what you have now, from 9% to 15%. That's going to be very nice for the late game scaling. And the other one, Rolling Agony. Rolling Agony is going to be very handy for multi-target, multi-dot fight, because it's going to increase the duration of your Agony by 4 seconds from a single rank 1. So you can already go from the initial duration of 18 seconds to 22, and later on in the expansion, the 18 second is going to be 27 second long Agony, which is very nice. But the first 2, you know, the extra damage on Malefic Rapture and the cooldown reduction on Dark Color at the start of the expansion are going to be very, very powerful. As an additional tidbit, it's worth mentioning that DOTs from Malefic Rapture only count as your abilities. No, unfortunately, all these DOT trinkets that you see are not going to work with your Malefic Rapture, otherwise it would have been insane. Unfortunately, trinkets don't count for your Malefic Rapture. But beyond this, we see why Affliction Warlock is so nice right now. We see why its damage profile is so nice. I don't exclude, please cover your ears, fellow Affliction Warlock players, I don't exclude that Malefic Rapture is going to be nerfed before release or before the release of Mythic. It is a little bit too powerful right now for just everything. Maybe some tweaking, extra damage on the target with Unstable Affliction, but nerf the overall AoE damage, something like that. Right now it's a little bit too, you know, all-purpose use. There isn't really much, really, to find against Affliction. It's just so all-purpose, their toolkit, their damage. The burst, the sustained damage is just so nice. Even their cooldown, Darkglare, is so nicely designed for the type of damage you want to do. The Darkglare will serve you for 20 seconds, damage increased by 10% for every damage over time effect you have active on any target. This is just the dream cooldown you want to have in Castle Natria. You know, when you have 8 targets out, in just 2 casts, in just about 4 seconds, 3.5 seconds, you Seed of Corruption and Impending Catastrophe, and you suddenly have 16 DOTs out on the fodder you don't care about. Yes, you don't care about that fodder, but that fodder is going to give you 160% more single target damage on your Darkglare. That's why the fodder becomes important. If you're a Demon Hunter, you're just eye-beaming all of them. Yeah, you will top the meters because you're eye-beaming all of them, but the priority damage you can do with Affliction Warlock is going to be so potent in Castle Natria. It is just such a nicely designed spec right now for the type of damage you want to do and the way it works. Very, very nice. And you guys playing in the pre-patch, you don't have to fear too much, because Affliction isn't really being modified too much by the pre-patch. I mentioned this before when I went over some other specs that had some crazy Essence to Azerite Trait combination completely skewing the way they were working. Affliction isn't even that in the pre-patch. Affliction is playing with Blood of the Enemy, which is just an extra burst damage. You know, it's not that it changes the way you play. It's just an extra cooldown you use right before you use your Darkglare. When you're using your Racial, your Trinket, your Misery, you also use Blood of the Enemy. But nothing else changes. It's still the same. And your traits are completely irrelevant. Heart of Darkness is just pumping your secondary stats and does nothing else. And Racking Brilliance is also just pumping your damage and nothing else. So the way you play isn't even that heavily changed from the pre-patch. If you were worried about some massive borrowed power loss. Even your corruptions that you lost, you were mostly going for haste stacking, but you didn't have any crazy synergy like destruction. You know, destruction with flashpoint, giving them a billion haste, right? Yours was just haste stacking for the sake of haste stacking and nothing else. So coming into Shadowlands, you aren't even going to get that gutted by borrowed powers. So everything right now is looking bright. I eagerly await publishing this video and figuring out about 3 hours later that Affliction has been gutted from a new round of nerfs in the beta. That's totally gonna happen. But for now, we can rejoice. You can rejoice if you were planning on playing Affliction or trying Affliction out, because it's looking very, very nice. And with this, we can call it quits on Affliction. We have went through this enough already. I hope all of you have learned something more, if you didn't, about Affliction. If you played Affliction already, maybe you figured out something you didn't pay attention to before. And as we move away from Affliction, we are going to go back to another melee DPS spec. We're getting close to the time where we will be go over tanks and healers though. We will be taking a small break eventually from the DPS classes to go back to some tanks and healers. The next one though is going to be a melee DPS spec. So stay tuned for that. Let me know what you guys think about the Affliction that you have tried in the pre-patch, especially to you guys who have played Affliction before. If you like it more or not, please don't say you like it less. Please don't say you like spamming Unstable Affliction. Please. And now it's time to take my leave. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I'm off praying for Demonology Warlock.